You're in the water loop.
Waterloop is made possible in part by grants from Spring Point Partners and the Walton Family Foundation. The Waterloop podcast is sponsored by Flume. It's the perfect device for tracking your home's water use in real time on your smartphone. It's so easy to use. You just attach a small device to your water meter using a band, the same way you put a watch on your wrist. Then you connect to Wi-Fi, you download the app, and you're up and running. It's as simple as that. You don't need a plumber. You don't need to cut into any of your pipes or water lines. Very easy to set up. Then you can set water budgets, how much you want to use each day or week. It'll keep track of that. It'll tell you what's going on in your house with water use minute by minute. It'll send alerts to you if there's excessive water use or if it suspects a leak. In fact, when I installed Flume at my house, it told me almost right away about a leak. I was losing a gallon of water every 6 minutes. I'm honestly not sure when I would have found that without Flume. You can use promo code WATERLOOP for 10% off at flumewater.com. Waterloop. Water conservation is very important to me. I bet it is to many of you as well. That's why I have High Sierra shower heads in my house, and I'm really happy that they're a supporter of this podcast. They carry the EPA WaterSense label for efficiency, and they use 40% less water than conventional low-flow shower heads. The model I use runs at only 1.5 gallons per minute. And because of their unique nozzle design, patented that nobody else has, it maximizes efficiency of water and energy, but doesn't compromise on performance. You still get a very strong shower. Use promo code LOOP20 for 20% off at highsierrashowerheads.com.
You're in the water loop.
Welcome to Waterloop. This is Travis. For this episode, I get to talk about one of my absolute favorite places, New Mexico. I am joined by Laura Paskus. She has been writing about New Mexico's natural resources and communities since 2002 as an assistant editor of High Country News, a radio producer at KUNM, managing editor of Tribal College Journal, freelancer for a variety of publications, serving as a correspondent for PBS's New Mexico in Focus, and she has a book out, At the Precipice, New Mexico's Changing Climate. So you've been writing and talking about New Mexico's environment for about 20 years. Lucky you.
Lucky me. I've gotten obsessed with a few particular issues and can't seem to let go of them.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I enjoy, following you on social media is your enthusiasm for the place you live and its environment comes through. You are not afraid to hide that. And it'd be hard to because New Mexico is a spectacular place.
It is. It really is. And having joy for the place you live and write about is important, I think.
New Mexico, how would you describe the water situation or the presence of water, the waterscape, the hydrology of New Mexico?
Yeah, we're an extremely arid state. We have 3 major rivers. We have maybe I should say 4 major rivers: the Rio Grande, the Pecos River, the Canadian, and then the Gila. And these aren't giant rivers by East Coast standards. And the Rio Grande and the Pecos for the past 20 years or so have pretty consistently dried each summer. So we're a snow melt driven system. And as the climate warms and we see less snow melt and we see warmer and warmer temperatures, that affects our surface water. We also have groundwater resources, but we've been pumping them pretty intensely and deliberately since probably the 1950s. And so we also have some pretty serious concerns about groundwater resources in the state as well.
Yeah, I think that's it's an amazing place. I mean, when I've gone hiking there, you have these dry arroyos, right? Those are like the stream beds, and I guess just when you actually get those heavy rain events, those will get water in them. In the meantime, they're kind of great pathways up into the mountains and everything. Um, how has water in New Mexico and management approaches to it changed in the past 2 decades that you've been really intensely covering it?
Unfortunately, a lot of things have not changed. You know, we've known about climate change this entire time, known that it was going to be a threat to New Mexico's water supplies. And it's really only in the past couple of years that there have been serious conversations about climate change and the future of water in the state, like the realistic future versus the future that we want or hope for. Unfortunately, in New Mexico, we also, in the intervening years of a Republican governor who, while not an outright climate denier, was aggressively anti-regulation, anti-environment, and anti-climate change in terms of mitigation or adaptation. So state agencies were really hampered by that for 8 years.
Yeah, interesting. I think that's happened in a number of states around the country, or even at the federal level, where you have someone in elected office who is not a believer in climate change and sets policy back in a big way as a result. So you put out a book really all about climate change. Was that is it like a compilation almost of your 20 years of work? Is it something that you spent a few intense years researching and writing? What's really the genesis and the content of that book?
Yeah, so it kind of looks back on about 15 years worth of reporting. And my goal with the book was to take a bunch of reporting that I've done over the years and put it together in kind of a narrative way that takes general readers through the state and helps people understand the causes of climate change, the impacts of climate change here in New Mexico, and also some of the political background that unfortunately really affects policy. So my hope was that general readers who were interested in New Mexico, interested in climate change, interested in water, would come along with me and learn some stuff.
There's a lot of stories that get picked up, at the higher level, national level, about the Colorado River Basin, right, and drought in Colorado and Arizona and California. You don't hear as much about New Mexico. Why do you think that is? The climate impacts are hitting there. Is it there's less people, or what are your thoughts on that?
That's such a great question, and I agonize over this all the time because the Rio Grande Basin and the Colorado River Basin share so many similarities climatically, snow melt-driven systems, the same warming and drying patterns hold true across both. I think the Colorado River gets a lot more attention for a couple of reasons. One, it's bigger, it serves more people. There are more states involved. There's more powerful entities involved, including, really powerful states like California and cities like San Diego. But also in the past few years, there's been so much foundation attention on the Colorado River. The Walton Family Foundation has really made a huge investment in, sorts of like collaborative solutions and media coverage and, sort of like what I think of are really positive things in terms of attention on the serious situation in the Colorado River. But New Mexico, Texas, Colorado, the Rio Grande Basin is very much neglected. And I think oftentimes what happens when we do get national coverage, I've seen this happen a number of years where I'll be reporting on the river drying in the summer. And then, that will pique the interest of a national reporter who sees that. And then the New York Times does a big story and there's national attention on it, for a minute. And then that evaporates.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. The way you describe it, this is still a big area, and a lot of people are it seems like there's a crisis point in the Colorado almost. They're really having this aridification of the basin and looking at their water levels. Is it as dire in New Mexico for what's outside of the Colorado River Basin?
I'll be honest, I'm really worried about this year. So last year we had a close to normal snowpack from November to February, and yet we had, I think it was by May, we had only 20% of the historical average of the Rio Grande flowing through Albuquerque. The river was dry by the end of May. And there were about 50 miles dry through the summer. We had a really warm fall and saw drying spreading into areas that wasn't really common. And so we now have a situation where the reservoirs are very low, stream flows are low, and we're in a La Nina pattern for this winter. We just had some really nice snow this past week, which will be great for bumping things up, but we'll likely see a warmer than average spring and early runoff. And I am a little bit worried about the Rio Grande this year and the people who rely upon it, especially farmers, just because the system is so stressed already. The reservoirs are low, stream flows are low, soils are parched. And so I think this year could potentially be a really shocking year for people. We had a shocking year in 2018, and we had, a nice runoff in 2019, although the river still dried. 2020 was challenging, and this year has me feeling a little queasy, to be honest.
Right. So the challenging years are outnumbering the good years, it sounds like, which is a scenario playing out elsewhere as well. Yeah, I just was, I was looking for the first time when I was preparing to talk to you and at New Mexico, and the fact that you have the Colorado River watershed, as your western part. You've got the Rio Grande in the middle, and you even have the feed into the Mississippi. How much do people talk about that fact that you even feed into the Mississippi, right? And then you've got three of these kind of major, important, iconic rivers all involved in your state.
Yeah, honestly, we don't talk much about the Canadian River in New Mexico. And so it is important for water supplies in the eastern part of the state, and they're planning to build a pipeline from one of the reservoirs there. But really the focus is on the Rio Grande, the San Juan, which is in the Colorado River Basin, and then the Pecos.
Gotcha. Yeah, I always remember I think maybe the first time I ever flew into Albuquerque, the river's there, and it was the time of year when all the cottonwoods are yellow, and it was just like this beautiful ribbon of yellow right there. And those trees, I totally fell in love with them then. But I love how you can just tell where the water is, based on that type of thing. So cool. And then another trip, I was up by Taos, and there's that big bridge. I'm sure you know which one I'm talking about. And what is that over? Is that the Rio Grande there also?
Yep, it is.
Yeah. So such an amazing place. A little bit of the news recently is that I think the nominated Secretary of Interior is a former representative from New Mexico. Could you talk about that and what that might mean, having someone from New Mexico step into this national policy seat?
Yeah, it's been really exciting to watch Deb Haaland and her political rise. Certainly since she's been representing New Mexico the past few years, it's been really interesting to see how her outlook on things like water and social justice and environmental justice inform her work. And I am really, as a New Mexican, I am very excited to see that she was nominated as Interior Secretary. She has a strong understanding of the science of climate change, but she also has a very personal and intimate understanding of how climate change affects communities in the southwestern United States, and a history of and understanding the history of how Indigenous people in the southwestern United States have weathered challenging climatic conditions historically, and the importance of water. And I think that is really exciting. She also has a strong understanding of the impacts of the oil and gas industry on communities, native communities, but all sorts of communities in New Mexico, and what the public health impacts and what the environmental impacts of the oil and gas industry can be on the ground, and also in terms of larger greenhouse gas emissions issues. One of the things, my first career was as an archaeologist, and I worked as a tribal consultant also, and so I have like a pretty good understanding of how tribal consultation works in the United States, as opposed to how it's supposed to work under the spirit of the laws that guide that relationship. And I really feel like tribal consultation in the United States is not done well or properly in the vast majority of the cases, and we see that certainly here in the southwestern United States. And Haaland has a strong understanding of why tribal consultation is important, not just because you're supposed to include tribes in decisions that affect their communities and their futures, but also because tribal communities have great input into, helping shape projects and shape the future. And so I think she would bring a stronger understanding. And also the Biden administration has issued an executive order on strengthening tribal consultation. But across the board, I think she's intelligent and thoughtful. She's also an extremely compassionate and grounded person. And I just think for an agency like Interior to be led by somebody like Haaland would be a watershed moment in U.S. history.
Yeah, certainly historic to have an Indigenous person in that role. It's very, very exciting. Absolutely. You mentioned a little while ago about, drilling and groundwater and fracking, and maybe for people you could explain how much of that industry has a presence in New Mexico and the impact it's had on groundwater. And then I've also seen a lot in the news over the past bunch of months about New Mexico's movement to try to get a better understanding and management of, the impacts on groundwater of that drilling industry. So about 4 or 5 questions in one there for you.
Yeah, so our groundwater resources are really important and in many places imperiled, and that's due to all sorts of activities: agricultural pumping, cities pumping water, the military's contamination of groundwater in New Mexico is a huge deal. So there's lots of different aspects to New Mexico's groundwater problems, but we do have 2 big areas of oil and gas development in New Mexico. The San Juan Basin in the northwestern part of the state is predominantly natural gas. And then the southeastern part of the state is part of the Permian Basin, where there's a lot of oil development. And these are very water intensive industries and activities. And unlike agricultural use, where the water stays within the system, we could talk about what's most efficient and what kind of farming should happen in the Southwest, but it stays relatively healthy within the hydrological cycle, versus the oil and gas industry is, using fresh water and then polluting that and leaving that water either in pits on the surface or re-injecting that polluted water into the ground. So it is a water intensive activity, but it's very much a water polluting activity where that water can't be used for other things once it's been contaminated.
Sure. And then what are the pieces I've seen in the news recently about kind of some changes, proposed changes to try to better understand and I think regulate even what's happening there?
Yeah, so the Water Data Act, I think it was called, was passed a couple of years ago and is really this great statewide effort for all the different agencies and entities that collect water data to start talking the same language and using some of the same sorts of measurements and data systems so that basically we can have a better picture of our water resources in the state. I wish that we could have done something like that 20 or 30 years ago, but at least we're starting now.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask also, since you've been covering the water and the environment there, what are some of the positive things that jump out? What are some of the success stories maybe that you've seen? Obviously, we've talked a lot about the challenges and the doom and gloom and so forth, but I'm sure there's been good stuff that's happened on the waterfront.
Yeah, one of the things, I love the Water Data Act. I think that was a great step, and the coalition that came around that. There are some really great examples in New Mexico of how people survive difficult times in terms of shortage sharing on the acequias or communities that come together to figure out ways that everybody still gets some water where people aren't cut off. On the very local scale, there are great examples of that. One of the things that I'm most excited about right now is the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission, which is, I think it's 9 people, and they're appointed by the governor, and they're supposed to be taking, a statewide look at New Mexico's ability to comply with interstate compacts. But, that they're not only focused on compact compliance, they're also focused on the environment and community and things like that. And traditionally, as I have covered the Interstate Stream Commission, it's almost always been dominated by agricultural interests and, kind of older Anglo men who are really focused oftentimes on just trying to make sure that their communities are served under this commission. And that's not the case for every commissioner, but by and large, the commission as a whole, I think it's fair to say that. And we currently have this very diverse Interstate Stream Commission, and I was sitting in on a water planning meeting yesterday, and some of the conversations that were occurring, honestly, I've been waiting almost 20 years to hear these conversations and talking about equity and talking about community level programs and what the state can learn from community level programs. And I think that's really exciting. And I think it kind of reminds me of what New Mexico's biggest strength is our diversity. What makes New Mexico such a special place is that we have 21 American Indian tribes, that we have, Spanish land grant communities and acequia communities and recent immigrants. And our diversity really is our strength and our ability to think about resilient and sustainable paths forward. So I think that's the thing I love best about New Mexico, even though we have these challenges that can seem overwhelming.
Sure. Oh, that's awesome. Love it. I wanted to ask you last about kind of journalism itself. You've been a journalist here working for 20 years. You're also a board member of the Society of Environmental Journalists, such an awesome, important organization. We've also seen over the past couple decades, unfortunately, what's happened to traditional newsrooms, with just the huge cuts to editorial staffs and kind of the fracturing of media and all this changing landscape. And then the public, being caught up in lots of different issues. So let's say, what have you found the public's appetite to be for water issues right now?
I think that audiences love stories that are told in interesting ways, right? And I think sometimes what has happened with daily news coverage and newspapers over the decades is we became so committed to telling balanced stories or short stories, or not giving readers the benefit of the doubt, and understanding that readers actually do want context and they do want history. I think we really underappreciated readers and started kind of giving them stories that were not very interesting to read. And I think if you tell stories about complicated issues like water, that you should trust your audience enough to know that you can spend a couple of paragraphs giving them context. If you just kind of lay out these, like, this happened, this happened, this happened, this person said this thing, I don't want to read that story, even if I'm super interested in water. So I think that it's incumbent on journalists to push back on their editors who think water stories are boring. If you tell good water stories, interesting water stories, people want to read them. A few years ago, when I was hired at New Mexico Political Report, I was so lucky. I had a statewide environment beat and really the freedom to cover any environment stories that I was interested in or I thought were important. And kind of the expectation was kind of like, we think the environment is a really important beat, and we're going to hire you with the expectation that we know your stories probably won't get a lot of clicks, but that's okay because they're important. And what ended up happening was those stories were consistently among the highest read. And I just think we really have to believe in our audiences and give them an interesting story to read that helps them understand the world around them better.
Yeah. Getting to the idea that traditional outlets have kind of been scaled back, and a lot of them dropped environmental reporters. That was part of the collateral damage, I guess. How would you describe the way that the journalism universe has kind of filled that void?
That's a good question. I think it really, what's so exciting was it probably in the late 90s where we saw more and more outlets having an environment reporter and having that dedicated beat. And the fact that that was one of the first things that was cut as newspapers started cutting resources and cutting staff was really discouraging. And really what has kind of filled the gap is the nonprofit media model, where you're relying on grants or reader donations. And there's foundation support for that, but that comes and goes in waves. And so that's like a scary model to rely on in the long term as well. But I think that I always try to think about reporting and storytelling in terms of like, if you can maybe just like encourage or inspire other reporters who might be on like the business beat or the local politics beat to like cast a little glance over at environment, climate, and think about how they can incorporate that into their stories. The environment isn't an exclusive beat and shouldn't be an exclusive beat. And I think these are the types of stories that can be told with, sort of great interest and joy. And these are stories that involve people and complicated, weird, interesting dynamics. And I don't know, I think we could have a little bit more fun when reporting sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I think certainly a lot of fun to be had reporting on the environment in New Mexico, which is one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you. Been, seeing all your stuff on social media for a long time. Like I said, huge New Mexico fan. So I'm glad for the chance to catch up and chat about some of these topics. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you so much, Travis. I appreciate it.
Waterloop.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to today's episode. A special thanks to Waterloop supporters Spring Point Partners and the Walton Family Foundation. The Waterloop podcast is sponsored by High Sierra Showerheads, the smart, stylish way to save energy, water, and money while enjoying a powerful shower. Save 20% with promo code WATERLOOP at highsierrashowerheads.com. Waterloop is also sponsored by Flume, the smart water monitor that tracks your home's water use in real time and provides data on your smartphone. Save 10% with promo code WATERLOOP at flumewater.com. If you like Waterloop, please subscribe to the YouTube channel or your favorite podcast platform. Follow us on social media and visit waterloop.org to sign up for updates.
Waterloop, Waterloop, Waterloop.